Hello and welcome to this OpenTX Quick Tip. This quick tip is for a gentleman called Barak. Barak, this one is for you. Now, for those of you that haven't been watching the channel or you've stumbled on this video and you haven't watched any of the other Painless 360 videos, I'll put a link here to the OpenTX Mix School. Everything I'm going to go through in this video is covered in lots more detail in the OpenTX Mix School playlist. And that starts off very simply and then goes to some pretty complicated stuff. Now, all the things we're going to talk about in here, we're going to talk about having different outputs selectable by a switch. We're going to talk about flight modes. We're going to talk about things like curves, are all covered in that playlist. So if you're not sure what that is, go and have a look in the playlist and it goes into everything in far more detail. This probably isn't the first video that I'd recommend that you watch on OpenTX. If you haven't come across OpenTX before, it's going to blow your mind. But what Barak is after is he has a plane that has both flaps and ailerons, and he wants the flaps to work as ailerons when he wants them to, and to work as flaps when he wants them to as well. And he wants the ability to switch between those two settings. So let me just show you here. There's a number of ways that we can do this. So here's a model that we've got. Standard 4 inputs, rudder, elevator, throttle, aileron. The mixes look like this. So this is before we've done anything to it, just so I can show you what it looks like. So we have the two flap channels. You're going to need two flap channels and you're going to need two aileron channels with this potentially, just to make it all work. You could get away with a Y cable. The thing is with the flaps is you want them to almost work independently as ailerons. So you won't be able to get away with a Y cable for the flap. So you're going to have two outputs. But look, let me just show you what it actually looks like. So here's our radio. Here are all the radio outputs and the gubbins on the right hand side. So the way it works is that channel 1 here is going to be the left aileron. Channel 4 is going to be the right aileron. Channels 2 and 3 are the flaps. So as I move the roll control, the aileron left and right, there we are, they're kind of moving. They're actually reversed, but it's just graphically nicer to show you this way. It's more about how you make them all link up. So there we are, they're kind of moving. Next job then is to do the flaps. Now the flaps, if we look at how they're set up, switch A in the two positions gives us flaps up and down. So what we're going to do, if we simulate that again, if I move switch A, you're watching channels 2 and 3, there are the flaps moving. In reality, I would probably do something like I would add a slow up and down just here, just to make those flaps descend and rise in a slightly more scale way. I don't like it when they just jump up. It looks a little bit too modelly. Now, what we actually want is to be able to flick a switch so that in one position, the flaps work as flaps, and put the SF in the right position. There we are. We have the aileron stuff moving, just the ailerons on the outside. We have the flaps working, unless switch F is in this position, in which case the flaps start working in the same direction as the aileron controls. So let me show you how I've done that. All we've done is in the mixes, we've added one extra line into the two lines for the individual flap channels that the servers are going to plug into. So that's channels 2 and 3. So remember, these are the two that we had in the standard default setup. We've added one extra one, which is the aileron here, but it only works when SF is in the down position. So that only happens when SF is down. So what that means is that if SF isn't in that position, then you have all this stuff. Now it also means that if you got the flaps in the half position and SF is still turned on, then they still kind of work as ailerons. You have that option, which is maybe the way you want to do it. The challenge that we have with this way round, it's very simple and straightforward. All we're doing is we're adding one line into the mixes for the two flaps, and we're making sure that it's selectable via a switch, SF in the down position. Is that we have limited control about the actual travel for the aileron on this. We could change the weights and things, but you see here that from the middle channel position for the aileron to the fullest extent is about the same travel as for the flap. Now it might be that the flap cannot actually physically move that far, so we could do a couple of things. We could actually change it so that the weight is less. So maybe we make that 80, maybe we make that minus 80. And if we simulate it again, then when SF is turned on, so we have kind of the flaps working as ailerons, they don't move quite as far. But there is also a cuter way of doing it, and that is this way, which is the way that I would probably do it. A couple of things on here that we're playing with, which is a little bit nice. First is we've set up a flight mode, one called normal, which is the one that you are in by default, and then when SF, same switch, is in that down position, we've called it ailerons. And if I simulate that on the radio, you might have spotted this on the previous model because I had it on there as well. But as I move SF between normal and the aileron flaps as ailerons, you can actually see it change on the screen. I tend to use this an awful lot on my radios where I'm not using telemetry stuff back from the flight controller. It just means at a glance, if I'm flying, if I missed or someone was talking when the audio announcement was on, or I can't remember what it was because I've been flying in that mode for so long, a little look down at the screen, I can see what's going on. So that's changing the flight mode. And what I've done is, if we look in the mixes now, it looks a lot more complicated, but it really isn't. If we look at the individual settings for the standard flap controls, I've said that these controls only work in flight mode 0. And flight mode 0, if you remember, is this one here. Flight mode normal, we've called it normal, we could have called it whatever you want, but flight mode 0 is the one that the standard flap stuff works in, and that's the same for both of the flap pieces. And then we have this bit here, which is the aileron piece, and I'm saying that the aileron piece only works when the flight mode is set to 1, and flight mode 1, if you remember, is the aileron. Now flight modes are really powerful things because you can have lots of things set up, different trims, different global variables, all kinds of stuff at the flick of a switch, and you could also choose between different outputs and settings in the actual mixer screen on here as well. So all we're doing is we're saying, rather than use the switch to change between the bottom part and the top part, standard flaps, and the flaps being used as ailerons, rather than use the switch, we're using the different flight modes instead, and we can just very quickly change the one we want. So that results in essentially the same performance. So now we have the flaps working as ailerons, and when it's not in that position, they just work as flaps. But you'll have noticed something a little bit different. The actual travel of the flaps when we're using the flaps as ailerons is much higher, and that's because I'm using one other trick, and this allows us to define exactly how the flap moves in relation to the existing aileron on that wing, and that's using something called a curve. So if I just jump into curves, I've set up one curve for the right flap and one curve for the left flap, and the reason that I've set it like this is so that the travel that we get is 100% of the travel for that side of the movement. So let me just show you that again. So in the simulator, if I move, so with SF in the on position, we're in aileron mode or super aileron mode, the travel for each side is 100%. Now that might be way too much. So say for example we want to change how it actually travels. So we might say that, you know what, we don't want the flap to go all the way up because that might be pushing it into the wing, so it might be there, and actually we want it to be something like that. And then we say for curve 2 we'll do kind of the same thing. Maybe the flap can't go all the way up into the wing, and that's where it needs to stop, and to come down to match the existing flap it needs to be somewhere like that ish, just for example. So now if we simulate it, you'll see that the flaps don't go all the way to the top, and that might be the position where we're actually in line with the wing, and when we move them they only move the extent that we have set up with those curves, and curves gives you much more fine control, particularly as you probably don't want the flap, because hopefully you can see here that it means using a curve, the flap will never try and rise past the most upward point and damage the linkages. So there we are. There's a couple of ways to do it. First of all is you can just use it with a really basic switch. If you don't want to mess around with flight modes or all that shenanigans, you can just set it up and add an aileron channel to the outputs for the different flaps and make sure that it's only selected when the switch you want is in that particular position. Or if you want to be a little bit more sophisticated, you can do some cool stuff. You can use things like flight modes, and you can also then use the flight modes to select the different functions for the different controls. And then you can also be quite clever and use curves to exactly match the way that the ailerons and the flap moves together to give you the desired effect. Thanks for watching the video and watching right to the very end. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you like the video and like what I'm doing here, then hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon too. If you really like what I'm doing, you can go the extra mile and become one of my Patreons for access to me directly for support, and also giveaways and regular updates too. If you're looking for particular content, then check out the playlist. I organize all of my videos into playlists, so if you're looking for a particular topic, you can find everything here. If it's called Introduction To, it's designed to start very simply and build on that simple introduction to teach you all about it. If it's called For Beginners, then that is really aimed at people who are brand new to that part of the hobby. You can also search on YouTube for anything that you're interested in using the search function at the top. So iNav Painless 360 will find all of my videos and even the playlist around iNav. So thanks again for watching, and happy flying.